All right, let's talk about food security. We're joined on the program by Mr. John McKenna, who is the country director of Oxfam Nigeria. Mr. McKenna, thank you so much for coming on the program.
You're most welcome having me this morning.
Food is an important conversation, so let's throw a bit of just simple data. We've not done quite well in terms of food security. We're bordering and hovering around 39 to 40 and slightly around that percent in the last few months since this administration. This is going on 2 years, so food has not really performed well. Cost of living is high, is astronomical. People are struggling. We also have gains in terms of security forces doing their bit, but sometimes we're losing those gains because we just heard about 40 farmers were killed. So what do you help us make sense of broadly what is going on within the food security spectrum, if you will? Allow me to use that term.
Thanks very much. Perhaps we'll start from looking at the issue of food as being a basic necessity for human survival. And it forms as well the cornerstone of any national development, because it's actually people that contribute to national development, and you need healthy people to be able to do that. And when you're talking about food security access, and so you're talking about accessing adequate and nutritious food, which is very important, and it becomes a human right issue, fundamental human right issue. The good development, I think, for Nigeria is that we have made some good progress. Looking at the shift from where we're looking at Food Security Act, now looking at the right to food. Now, when you're talking about issues of right to food, there are a number of issues that needs to be looked into. First of all, when you're talking about people's rights, it's kind of an entitlement. So this is an entitlement that every Nigerian has. Unfortunately, yes, as you're putting it, we have some challenges that we're experiencing. Projections from Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, indicates that 33 million people would be facing food insecurity in 2025. Now, if you're talking about that number, a lot of people, so actually it's 33 million, that's a huge number. So what it means is basically 33 million Nigerians would be missing out on their food entitlements. Remember, we're talking about right to food. And as I said, right to food is an entitlement that citizens have. Now, there are a number of issues that we should also be looking into within the food security. One is basically the whole issue around production. Then there is the whole issue in terms of access and an element of affordability, which is also linked to the whole issues of access. Going back to the issue of production, first of all, I should also recommend that the government, for accepting to move into looking at right to food from Food Security Act, is already an advancement. So I would want to say that's a very good recommendation, and congratulating the government of Nigeria for basically moving into that direction. On the other hand, we should be looking at, are we able to basically to review what we said we'll be achieving under the right to food. So issues of production, are we able to produce enough to be able to feed our citizens? There are a number of factors that have to be looked into in that area. One is basically looking at what's our policy that is promoting food production. When you compare Nigeria to other countries, Nigeria is already on a potential position because diversity in food is one of the issues that is available in Nigeria. It's not just looking at one type of food. I mean, people are eating rice, people are eating yams, people are eating sweet cassava, sweet potato, and so many other things. Already, that's a diversity in food which is recommended. However, the issue of production, if adequate people, and as I said, 33 million still missing their food entitlement in 2025, that's a concern. So we should be reviewing in terms of our strategies. Do we have all the strategies in place for us to be able to look at issues of production? Now, within this, you need to look at a number of issues. For example, issues around inputs. Do our farmers have access to adequate input to be able to produce enough? If you look at availability of land, which is one of the factors that would enable production, I would actually say Nigeria, as compared to other countries, is on the positive side. But perhaps there are other factors that have to be looked into. As I said, it could be an issue of having inadequate inputs that have to be looked into. Inputs would be looking at a number of issues. I mean, it could be looking at issues to do with seeds, for example. Do the farmers have the right seeds that they could plant and be able to produce enough? Do they have enough training to understand, for example, all issues to do with post-harvest losses? Because it says that globally, 50% of harvest would actually get lost if there are no proper mechanisms. So these are issues that have to be looked into. So what I'm trying to emphasize is there is need basically to be able to say, okay, we have had the act from 2023. 3rd March 2023, that's when it was enacted.
All right, Mr. McKenna, if I may comment, just a moment, Mr. McKenna, if I may comment. I know you've spoken about a lot of things and you've touched a couple of them, so let's take them in bits. I want you to speak to what you see from the end, from government's end, whether you're seeing this level of urgency you're talking about. You've done the analytics to say, by percentage, this is what this is how it will affect the citizens, and by the figures, this is how it will affect the citizens, and those figures are quite scary, looking at our population. So I see a sense of urgency, because I know there was supposed to be waivers or tax cuts, VAT cuts, or literally zero for essential food. I don't know, stand to be corrected, that program actually took off. There were even outlines by the customs as to the procedure and all of that, how effective it was. I do not think it was as effective. I don't even know whether it even started. So I want you to piggyback on that, to speak to urgency of government and whether they are or not they are showing that level of urgency as far as the issue of food is concerned.
I think one of the key issues that we should be looking at is just looking at the population that I've talked about that will be missing is food entitlements. And basically we should be going back to the drawing board to be able to analyze in terms of how much did we harvest in the last, how much production did Nigeria manage to get in the last harvesting season? And what are we missing out? All these issues that I've talked about in terms of seeds, in terms of inputs, in terms of post-harvest losses, are things that have to be considered. But I mean, this is very important because we're not just looking at the government, but we need to look at other stakeholders as well. NGOs, civil society organizations, and so many other players. I mean, we've got commercial farmers as well that are playing a role in ensuring food security. So all these players, I think we need to kind of go back to the drawing board, but this is something that the government needs to initiate because remember, the government is the chief duty bearer when it comes to meeting people's entitlements. So when it comes to issues of food, we should be going back to say, hey, here we are. Are we meeting all this that we said we'll do? I mean, it helps, honestly, when you kind of have something drawn to say, this is what we want to intend to do. So different stakeholders, as we're rightly putting it in terms of subsidies and even waivers that needed to be there. Are we fulfilling what we said we'll be doing? I'm mindful, yes, this was done in the previous government. So we have a new government in place. But these are things that we should be able to say, let's go back and look at the drawing board that we said we'll do, and to be able to do that. There are a number of other factors. I mean, for example, this just looking at production, but we should also be looking at issues of of distribution, which actually looks at issues of access. Not everybody is able to produce, but there are people that needs to be able to buy, people that could go to the market to be able to find food. Are we able to get the particular food that we require in the different corners of the country? So these are issues, I think, that we need to kind of look into and to be able to verify. There are issues that I think NGOs can do and other stakeholders can do, which is basically complementing to the chief duty bearer as the government, as I said earlier on. And these are things that needs to be looked into and looked into as fast as possible. There are players to do, like the Food and Agriculture Organization, WFP, who are able, for example, to be able to provide food to people that that I need. We should be emphasizing in terms of, can we do production in country? If we cannot get it in country, at least the surrounding countries be able to provide, to be able to buy food from them and be able to meet the people.
In terms of access, if you looked at the efforts of the subnational and even the federal government, you would find that there's a bit of intentionality, for instance, in the construction of access roads to communities where agricultural activity is ongoing. You find in some states of the federation, and if you looked at the budget, you find also some allocation to structures like the National Agricultural Development Authority for land clearing and for other implements and seedlings to be distributed to farmers. The question now is, what do you find in terms of accountability in the allocation of such funds, and the expenditure of such funds to farmers and to such structures such that there will be productivity in terms of agriculture?
So a number of issues. First of all, when we're talking about issues of access and distribution, it goes beyond just looking at the road network, but we should be looking at regulating in terms of availability of particular foods in the different areas. The issue you raised, which is very important in terms of distribution of budget, for example. Do we have adequate budget to be able to meet all these needs that we are talking about? Again, this is something that needs to be looked into at national level, at federal level, but at the same time, we should also be looking at what is happening at state level. Are we talking about the same things? Because sometimes there could be differences between federal plans and state plans, but we need to kind of bring all this together so that we're able to provide what is required by the smallholder farmers. One other key important element is basically the whole issue about extension services. Extension services that has to be provided by the state to be able to go out to the different farmers, because they can get seeds, for example, they can get improved inputs, but they will not be able to know exactly how they will need to use these. So it's important that we have adequate extension services, which in most cases, they are not adequate. There are challenges in terms of the ratio between one extension officer to the number of farmers that they have to meet. So these are issues that have to be looked into and addressed to be able to look at improved production of different foods that we need in the different corners of the country.
And even when these structures have been put in place in terms of human resource and what is on ground to enhance productivity, the challenge also seems to be in the area of security. Despite the steady rise in the budget allocated to security, Nigerians remain unsafe, particularly in the last decade. And there have even been some gains in the last year or two, particularly by the armed forces, in checking insurgency and banditry that seem to be impacting significantly on agriculture. But why is there a missing link in that area? Why hasn't it translated into progress or a sense of safety in communities where agriculture are taking place?
I think it would be important at different levels, with that state or federal level, for different stakeholders to come together to be able to look at the issue. For example, the issue of security is indeed very important, and it has to be addressed because it is indeed affecting low production, because farmers are not able to go to their fields because of fear of being abducted or being killed and all that. So this is where we should be looking at the different stakeholders at state level, even at federal level, to sit together basically to design, come up with a strategy that will be able to say, how do we go about, particularly during the time of production, time of cultivation, we should be able to protect our citizens, and so the citizens are able basically to go to their fields and do what is required for them to be able to produce adequately. So these are issues that needs to be looked into.
Mr. Makina, let's talk about subnationals and the roles they can play to ensure food security, because most of the time, We just beam our searchlight and our focus on the federal government. But now they are collecting record high numbers in terms of allocation. The last time was 1.7 trillion. We were even concerned about money supply with that kind of money injected into the system, given the fact that for some of them, or a lot of them, they change this money to dollars, and God knows what they use it for, as far as the people that are watching that space have alleged. So what exactly, if you were to, I'd like to do this geoeconomics of Nigeria in terms of critical focus, so that these governors who are watching the show will be able to know exactly how to appropriate, so that the people can be able to eat food. You talked about food as an entitlement, and I like that phrase.
A number of things, I think, as I said, has been an entitlement. We need also to look at the role of citizens. The role of citizens is basically to demand on the duty bearers in terms of what they said they would do, and check whether they're doing what they said they would do. So when you look at the national allocation of finances to the state level, the citizens at state level should be able to go to state secretariat and be able to demand, to say, we want to know how you have used this allocation that was made to our state, and whether it is actually meant to help us, or basically it has gone into some people's pockets. And actually, even the change from Food Security Act to looking at the whole issue on the right to food was as well from the voice of the people. People demanded for it, and the government accepted, which is good. Similarly, at state level, we should be able, citizens should be able to organize themselves and be able to demand these services, be able to demand to check what has been allocated to the different sectors, and whether it's just on paper or it's actually practically on the ground. So these are things that citizens should be able to do. So it's as well the role of the citizens to be able to demand, wanting to see what is being done by the different actors at state level or even at federal level.
I think sometimes, Mr. McKinney, asking citizens to demand, I know it is a role, but it's almost a tall order, because let's even go to the basics, or the bottom line, which is the local government. How many people can actually access their local government to make this demand? Which is why I wanted you to speak to the top, exactly from the state governors, as to what to do to directly impact. Because most of the time, what we do is we look at these monies and appropriation. But when you look at the impact at the end of the day, and you see just a very wide gap, despite the money's being expended.
It is actually the responsibility of the citizens, as I said, at different levels. I mean, but there is an issue in terms of, are they aware that they can actually go out and demand for these services? Are they aware that they could actually go and demand and wanting to see accountability of whatever was allocated to either at state level or at federal level? So this is something that we need to continuously talk about. Perhaps this is the role of the civil society organizations, that they need to kind of bring about the awareness to the citizens to be able to do what is required of them. But this is something, as I said, being an entitlement, it requires as well an accountability, and it requires the role of different stakeholders, including the citizens themselves, to be able to demand, wanting to see what is changing, what is not changing. What is put on paper, is it being translated practically on the ground? And these are things that our citizens, they need to be taken through and get that understanding and basically get organized. I know in most cases, when they get organized, the government thinks they are basically against them. But I mean, this is their responsibility. This is their entitlement. If it's a right, they have the entitlement. They need basically to be able to demand for it as well as is required. Thank you.
Mr. McKenna, the reason I asked that question, but I'm going to leave it to that, because you have to contextualize the Nigerian setup and how it works here to be able to know what is practical and what is not. So if we were to extrapolate as to, because food inflation is a big problem for us, food, generally the cost of living. If you were to give the government some level of an advice, consulting for the government, maybe FOC, say in the next 6 to 18, even to 24 months, this and this and this can actually turn the tide. I know you mentioned this in passing in terms of policy direction, is what I'm asking now.
Indeed, yes, but I mean, what I was saying is when the act was being done in 2023, there must have been already a plan in terms of what needs to be done differently. Because the key is how do we do things differently for us to be able to achieve food production in the country and enable our citizens access nutritious, adequate food that they need in their household. And so we should be looking at all that. And as I said, the number of players that need to be able to look into this, it's not just the government, as I said, there are other players, for example, the commercial farmers and all that. But the government is there to regulate all this, to regulate in terms of what do we expect from the commercial farmers, for example, and to be able to monitor, are they doing what they should be doing? Are we able to provide the inputs that our farmers require? We have also just talked about the issue of security. We should be able to monitor as well in terms of are farmers able to get to their food?
My apologies, Mr.
Not,
Makina.
What needs to be done differently?
Mr. Makina, we're winding down, so just last word, 30 seconds. What you're saying are conventional. I'm thinking of what unconventional measure we can use.
One is basically to bring about the stakeholders to a drawing board, to be able to look at all this and actually genuinely be able to ask ourselves questions. Are we achieving what we said we wanted to achieve? If not, can we do things differently to expect different results? Because we cannot continue doing what we've been doing and expect different results. So that's very, very important. And this is where we need to bring together different. The government needs to lead on this and be able to basically see the role of the different stakeholders and monitor them, as I said, to see whether they are doing and delivering what they said they will be working on.
All right. I must thank you so much, Mr. John Makina, Country Director of Oxfam Nigeria. Thank you for your intervention. We appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
You're most welcome for having me here.
All right, to take a quick break. When we come back, you know, some people are not very comfortable with numbers and calculation. Well, a gentleman has decided to make things easy for those of you who are scared whenever you have mathematics or science. He decided to use pidgin to teach people how to understand the complexities of computation in mathematics. We're joining us in just a moment after this break. Join us again.